Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and set up our initial scene so we can go ahead and render our character. Uh, and I'm just going to go ahead and import a background mesh that I created, which was just a simple cylinder that I cut the ends off and extruded along a curve. And this will, help us render to scale. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring in our V-Ray lights here. And it's very important that you don't scale these actually in the viewport, because when you scale them in the viewport, it tends to increase the intensity to an extreme amount. So you have to scale them in the attribute editor. And as you can see there, I just set the number to 50. And I'm basically just going to use a little bit of HDRI and 3 key lights to go ahead and light our scene. And as you can see, I just duplicated the light there. And I'm changing the color here to, a real light pink, just to try to get a little bit of warmth into the scene. And I mean, I'll try and keep the renders here, fairly low. Though whenever I up the resolution, I will be pausing the videos whenever I render, because V-Ray doesn't really take that much time, especially if you use the frame buffer. It's not where it's like Mental Ray, where it really sort of bogs the computer. It's just easier to pause the video, let it render out, and then come back. So as you can see, I created our render camera there. And I'm not really going to do anything special to the camera in terms of rendering, other than, just making sure I have the resolution gate turned on so I can see what I'm rendering and exactly where I'm rendering. As you can see there, the size of the image is eventually going to be really large at 3250 by 1828, but for right now we're going to use 1920 by 1080. Make sure I turn on the V-Ray frame buffer here. Make sure I turn on the override environment, because I'm going to plug in an HDRI, and that's where you have to have global illumination turned on in order for the scene to actually see the HDRI. But for right now, our initial rendering of the scene is fine. It just takes a little bit of time for it to calculate out. That's pretty much our initial studio lighting. So to go ahead and bring in an image now for our HDRI lighting, so we can have our initial light set up and scene. I'm just using, a JPEG image here, and this is just to test the rendering purposes of it. And then I'll just plug the same HDRI in a little bit later, because once I plug the HDRI in, it's going to take much longer for it to go ahead and render. It'll probably add about 20% of render time once I actually plug in the actual HDRI compared to the JPEG image. And as you can see, I just plugged it into the override GI environment there, and as you can see, I paused it there to go ahead and render out, and you can see that our scene is pretty good right now. You do see a little bit of square on the background, but I'll change that once I add a smooth division node to our background object. And I'm not really changing, too many settings. I mean, if I render that viewport subdivision now, it'll be fine. But once I add our mesh, it's really going to crush the computer. And I'll show you a little bit of trick to go ahead and render around that. That viewport subdivision is a global viewport subdivision, so anything that has a smooth node on it, or anything that's heavy in terms of geometry, it's really going to crush. Right now I'm just turning the subdivisions of our lights here up to about 20 each. This is going to soften shadows for each of our lights, and it's not going to make it so overly intense. Other than that, I'm not really changing anything. As you can see, I mean, our render is really, nice right now. And once we go ahead and add in the character, it's going to be better. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring in a polygon sphere here and just test it to really see how it's reacting in terms of the render. I'm making sure that I actually add everything here, or rename everything so that it can pretty much keep organized. And as you can see, I'm adding a smooth division node there, and this is because I don't really want to turn on that viewport subdivision because it really kills the computer. I mean, it will do some pretty, I don't want to say it kills the computer, it'll really, take a lot of time to render the viewport subdivision, a lot longer than it will if you just add a smooth node to it. And as you can see, our polygon sphere there actually looks pretty good. There's a little bit of artifacting, but I can change that with the anti-aliasing. So now I'll go ahead and change our anti-aliasing filter to 4. This will make it extremely crisp. And this is just mainly to how I render a character sheet. This definitely isn't, say, rendering a final production image. This is mainly just to get a good view of what your character looks like, and just a good turnaround of your character. Instead of waiting 8 hours to have a character turnaround, we can simply just, do a production sheet with 4 or 5 different duplications of the model in the scene. I'm just deleting things here that are unused in the scene. And I'm going to go ahead and create some render layers and some pass contribution maps here so that we can get out our main color, our ambient occlusion, and our depth pass. And I simply just created 2 layers there and added a pass contribution map to the occlusion layer so I could go ahead and add our Z depth and Z specular in there. And our ambient occlusion material is simply just a V-Ray dirt material. And I'm not really changing anything inside of, inside of the material attributes, except for keeping it completely white. The occluded color has to be black because this is where your shadows are coming from. The fall off I'm changing a little bit, not much. And I'll make sure I create a render override here. And I'm going to create a pass contribution map here so I can add our render elements into the scene. which is our depth and, you know, our specular pass. As you can see, I have our shadow and Z depth in there. And I'm fairly sure that those are the default settings. I don't really change anything there, but it's all based on my camera and my scaling. And I'm using the centimeters for my Maya units.